I've collected about 100 of these first-hand encounters in a country going through hyperinflation. And what I like about these first-hand experiences that people share is that they are very specific. It's specific advice from down to earth, just regular people who managed to get through it. Because if they hadn't managed to get through it, well, they wouldn't be with us today. So hyperinflation is a time when people lose everything, and it's embarrassing often to talk about it. So I've done my best to kind of conceal the identities of people when I felt like it mattered. I'm just going to get right into it. I'm sharing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these today, all over the world, all through sort of the last 100 years. First one here is Bulgaria. I've never heard anything about the Bulgarian 1997 hyperinflation until today when I found this encounter. She says, I lived through a hyperinflation in Bulgaria in 1997. My parents' lifetime savings vanished overnight. They had saved nearly enough to buy a flat, so an apartment. Instead, they lived their whole life with my grandparents, so their own parents. You hear a lot of that today with the millennials. My father's salary as a dentist at the time of hyperinflation was 5,000 leva, and the price of a loaf of bread reached 700 leva. So that's 6 loaves of bread for a salary. I don't know if that's monthly or annually. I don't know. I remember my father counting change to see if we even had enough to buy bread the next day. I remember that winter was dread. My parents could only afford to heat one room, and it was still freezing. Sometimes I would dress up for school in the evening, so she was a kid, and sleep with those clothes on, so because I would be too cold in the morning. Bulgaria had been a historically rural country until the communist regime, so most of her classmates had a grandparent living in a village with farms around it, so they would send food. But her family, that wasn't the case. She didn't have a grandparent like that. For half a year, we only ate potatoes, cabbage, beans, and bread, literally nothing else. Not even French fries, because there was no cooking oil. You can read the rest of that if you want off the screen. I do have to move on because I'm limited to 15 minutes right now. This is from Brazil in 1988. I was 8 during the hyperinflation in Brazil, and I remember the clicking sound of the tagging machine as the store clerk would update the prices daily. I remember our family buying all the groceries needed for the entire month the day my dad got paid. My dad is now 71 and my mom is 68, and even today they buy things in bulk, even clothing. I remember getting confused with the currency changes trying to buy candy with the change money. Just remove 3 zeros from the cruzados and you get the new cruzados. It was ridiculous. Still, my parents managed to pay their mortgage, raise 3 kids through private school. We lived comfortably with his salary as a doctor, but it wasn't that easy for everyone. So he had a more experience where his father was somebody who was very important. A doctor is very important within the community, and they were taken care of even through private school. Of course, Brazil also has a lot more experience with hyperinflation. They even did at that time in the late 80s. People had lived through that before, and that knowledge was there of how to deal with that. Venezuela 2010, this is my most recent example. This is from a girl, Reddit screen name Caracas Girl, which is the capital city of Venezuela. I saved a lot from her thread, but this I wanted to show today because the first crack, it's about the first crack in the system. She says, the first crack was in 2010. The economy was crashing hard. There were days-long blackouts. Food shortages became more widespread, and the economic controls were restricting a lot of the commercial activity companies needed to stay on business. The government decided to ease the exchange control, and the bubble exploded. So they kind of opened up. They did an opening up after an economically restrictive time. It didn't feel very catastrophic, but that year marked the start of more catastrophes. Foreign currency started to go scarce, and the black market was thriving. So she talks about a bubble exploding. Now, I think that means it's exploding to the upside, because it doesn't feel catastrophic. It's just sort of a shocking event. And then that was the start of more and more catastrophes. So that was 2010 Venezuela. Here is, it's not so much a story as it is an artifact from the time right after the German hyperinflation, the Weimar hyperinflation, and this is a book. So after they had been crushed with this complete devaluation of their currency. They had to start over, and this is how they were publishing, just with a paper. It almost looks like stapled together sheets off a photocopier. Book, Kant, from the year after hyperinflation. And finally, Austria in 1919, often forgotten, happened just before the German hyperinflation. Two accounts here. This from a woman whose son was in the war, and she was kind of well-to-do before, but the wife of a doctor whom I recently exchanged her beautiful piano for a sack of wheat flour. I, too, have exchanged my husband's gold watch for 4 sacks of potatoes, which will, at all events, carry us through the winter. So she sold her gold watch to get through the winter, 4 sacks of potatoes, which would normally cost $40 today. So half a day's salary, but she was exchanging gold for that. My farmer had hidden the sacks of potatoes under the straw, on top of which he placed some apples. The apples were stolen, but the potatoes reached me safely. I had to give the porter half a sack as hush money, because she, it would be, people would, I don't know. If they had caught word that she had potatoes, she would be robbed. When the farmer's eyes rested on the grand piano, he took aside and said, "My wife has been wanting one of those things for a long time. If you give it to me, you'll have all you want for 3 months." Others squandered money recklessly. Wine would be dearer tomorrow. On days when the dollar rose, there would be a run on the shops. Prices would rise from hour to hour. The public was seized with a mania for buying. This is the other side of the coin. Stories are told of an old bachelor who bought swaddling clothes because the local shop had nothing to sell. Shopkeepers countered by closing their shops on various pretexts: illness, family affairs, or stock taking. So I have lots of these stories. I'll be publishing more, sort of as a series, ongoing on this channel.